Toy Legends and Forgotten Fails. How many do you remember? Here we go.
The 1980s, what a golden age for toys, right? It gave us some of the most legendary action figures of all time. But here's the thing, for every massive hit, there were dozens of toys that just disappeared. So today, we're diving into the super competitive toy aisles of the 80s to figure out what separates a true legend from a forgotten failure. So, what was the secret sauce? Was it the concept? Was it the Saturday morning cartoon that came with it? Was the toy itself just better? Let's dig in and find out why some toy lines that companies bet big money on ended up as historical footnotes, while others became the stuff of legend. Make no mistake, the 80s toy scene was an absolute battlefield. On one side, you had titans like He Man, just dominating everything. And on the other, well, you had guys like Crystar, the Crystal Warrior. Now, he was based on a Marvel comic and everything, but the toy line just fizzled out. It was a casualty of a really brutal market, and trust me, it was far from the only one. Okay, so the first big reasons some of these toys just completely tanked, the concepts were, well, they were just too weird to catch on. And our first exhibit is a real doozy. It's a war fought over the contents of your refrigerator. Yep, you heard me right. That was the actual official backstory for Mattel's Food Fighters. It was a literal battle between warring factions of junk food. The funny thing is, the toy companies actively avoided making the heroes out of like broccoli and carrots because they thought kids wouldn't buy it. But it turns out kids didn't really want to play with this either. And the names, oh, you have to hear these. The good guys were led by Brigadier General and Lieutenant Leg. The villains, Mean Wiener and Taco Terror. I mean, as amazing as those puns are, the whole idea of militarized food just didn't land. And just like that, the line was gone after one series. You really got to think about the timing here. Transformers and GoBots were huge. The whole robot to vehicle thing was the winning formula. So Tonka's big game changing idea was to pivot to Rock Lords, robots that turned into rocks. It was a bold move, and let's be honest, a really strange departure from what was clearly working. So you had your good guys like Boulder and your bad guys like Magmar. But then it got even weirder with these little furry companions called Gnarlies. And to top it all off, one of the sublines, the Shock Rocks, had this truly electrifying action feature. They could roll. Yep, just roll. Not exactly the peak of toy engineering, you know? On paper, Mattel's computer warriors sounds kinda epic, right? Evil virus troops, accidentally unleashed from a top secret government computer, are trying to take over the world. To stop them, heroic micro soldiers are generated. It sounds cool, but the execution, well, let's just say it was unique. So the whole gimmick was that these tiny little warriors and their vehicles would hide inside perfectly normal, everyday objects. A flashlight would pop open to become a flashcraft, a sports trophy would turn into a radar rover, and as it turns out, most kids just weren't that interested in a world saving battle that started inside a can of Pepsi. All right, on to our next major reason for failure. Sometimes the concept was totally fine, but the toy itself was just a massive letdown. These are the toys that looked awesome on the box, but were missing one absolutely crucial ingredient: play value. And this brings us to the dreaded non posable figure, a toy that promises all this action but can barely move. A perfect, and I mean perfect example of this is a line called the Barnyard Commandos. Now, the concept was actually hilarious. The rebel army of military sheep fighting the platoon of rebel killer swine. RAMS versus PORKS. The acronyms are pure genius. But the figures themselves, they were basically just little squeaky toys made out of solid plastic. They couldn't move. When you've got shelves packed with superposable figures, these armed farm animals just couldn't compete. Oh man, this one hurts a little bit. The Inhumanoids line had some of the coolest, most terrifying, gigantic monster toys of the entire decade. Seriously, the villains were incredible, but the heroes, the humans who were supposed to fight them, they were the great disappointment of the line. And here's why it was such a bummer. This was Hasbro, the same company making the superposable G.I. Joe figures at the exact same time. But the human heroes for Inhumanoids? They only gave them 5 points of articulation. Their arms went up and down, their legs went up and down, and their head could turn. That's it. For kids who were used to G.I. Joe, this felt like a huge step backward. Okay, our final reason for failure might be the most 80s reason of all, the media tie in. Back then, a hit cartoon wasn't just marketing, it was everything. It told the story, it got you invested in the characters. So if your show was bad, or even worse, non existent, your toy line was in very, very big trouble. Case in point, Chuck Norris and the Karate Commandos. This cartoon premiered and was canceled in the span of a single month. It was a 5 episode miniseries that was so unintentionally funny and just so awful that it had absolutely no chance of helping Kenner sell any toys. But a bad cartoon was still better than no cartoon at all. Hasbro's Air Raiders line actually had a really clever air power gimmick, but without a show to tell their story and build their world, the line just sat on the shelves and ended up right where you'd expect, the clearance aisle. But here's the twist: the story doesn't just end in dusty attics and clearance bins. For a lot of these failed toys, their initial failure, the fact that nobody bought them, is the very reason they're so incredibly valuable to collectors today. Remember Air Raiders, the line with no cartoon? Well, because they sold so poorly, not that many were actually made. So today, a rare vehicle like the Man o' War, still sealed in the box, can go for over $500. Or take the Sectars. They had this enormous, and I mean enormous, playset called the Hive. It was so massive and complicated that most of them just got broken or lost over the years. So, trying to find a complete one today means paying what collectors lovingly refer to as an exorbitant price. And yes, even our bizarre rock lords have some hidden treasure. A super rare subline called the Jewel Lords are now considered the crown jewels of any rock lord's collection. So few were made that they're prized by collectors, and even loose figures, with no box, can command some shockingly high prices. So, isn't that fascinating? It's this perfect irony. A commercial failure in the 80s meant low production numbers. And now, decades later, that exact same scarcity is what makes them a holy grail for collectors, literally turning yesterday's forgotten flops into today's sought after gold. It kind of makes you look at these toys in a completely different light, doesn't it? Were they really bad ideas, or were they just too weird for the 80s? Maybe they were just one good cartoon away from being legendary. It really makes you wonder, of all these forgotten failures, which one do you think actually deserved to be a hit?